Well, what is the Starship? The Space Launch System and the Starship itself, and then it executes a peculiar maneuver, turns itself around, and Starship was supposed on this flight, and then it would also do a turn maneuver. There was so much concrete going around, flipping. And they did not attempt to separate. It's what's called a flight termination system. Actually failed subsequently. But Elon has a different attitude.
Hello,
Sure.
Motion viewers. Welcome back. If you watched our previous episodes, you may be very familiar with Mr. Tom Hafer. Mr. Hafer develops systems for neutralizing rockets and drones. He currently coaches teenager robotic teams. They met in the MIT Free Speech Alliance. Today, Mr. Hafer is going to present Starship. Good afternoon, Mr. Hafer.
Afternoon, Dr. Liu. Good to see you again. And yes, Starship is a very interesting subject about which I knew very little. So it took a lot of research to find out what's going on. And I still don't know, but I'll tell you what I have found out. The Starship test. What happened and what does it mean? So first of all, what is the Starship? So Starship is the biggest rocket that has ever been built. It's about 400 feet tall. And this compares it with some of the other space launch systems, some of the biggest ones. And Starship is really two different rockets. This part down here up to the actual Starship is called the heavy lift booster. And then on top of that, the second stage, which separates and is its own rocket here, is the actual Starship. And so that is shown over here. And the Starship itself consists of a large tank and motor section, which has liquid oxygen and liquid methane and 6 rocket motors down here. And then the cargo space up here, which can hold crew or cargo or whatever you want. And then it has a header tank up here, which can provide fine control of pitch and yaw of the rocket. So it has about the first stage, the heavy launch stage, has about 17 million pounds of thrust, much more than any of these other rockets. And then the upper stage Starship, once it separates, has about 3 million pounds of thrust. So what was it supposed to do? I apologize, this diagram's kind of hard to see, but I'll walk you through it. So there were 3 separate stages of this. First, down here is the actual launch stage, which it did. And then it is supposed to fly out and go up to a distance of 100 miles or so. And then it executes a peculiar maneuver where it actually flips, and in the process of flipping, separates the Starship from the heavy launch booster. And then the heavy launch booster continues the flip and then turns itself around and is supposed to come back and land normally back at the same place where it launched from. But in this case, it was going to ditch in the ocean. It wasn't going to be recoverable. And then the Starship was supposed on this flight to fly out for another several thousand miles. And then it would also do a turn maneuver. And then it was also going to ditch in the ocean. That's what was supposed to happen. Let's see what actually happened. So here's a very sped up clip of the actual flight itself. So you'll notice from the movie that there were supposed to be 3 things that happened. The first one, which was the launch from the pad here, was successful, but the launch pad was all torn up and big chunks of concrete flew all over the place. And it's not inconceivable that some of those concrete chunks actually went back up into the motor section and damaged some of the motors on the heavy launch booster. And part of that is because not all of the motors in the heavy launch booster, we'll show those in a minute, actually worked successfully. And so when this, in the process of launch, it actually slid sideways a bit, and it may have gotten into part of the launch pad that wasn't intended to absorb the thrust, and that may be why there was so much concrete thrown around. So then it did fly out, and then you'll see when it gets near the end of the film that it is actually spinning. It's flipping. And here it is, and there's the heavy launch section. And then you'll see here the Starship section is at an angle. And so it appears that they did not attempt to separate the two sections, but it appears that something broke right here. And so it was obvious that the flight was not going to be successful from there on out. And so then they issued the system didn't blow up, it was blown up by range safety. It's what's called a flight termination system. And that's included in every rocket of this type, every unmanned system. In fact, drones have them. The only thing I would note is that if this had been a manned flight, the people probably would have been able to get out safely because there would have been some type of an escape pod up here in the Starship itself. And so they would no doubt have ejected that. So the problems that cropped up were several. One, there was the question of why didn't all the launch motors ignite? And then later on in flight, you'll see some of them actually failed subsequently in flight. And in fact, what happened was that when it got up here near the place where the flip maneuver was scheduled, the central section of the flight motors have thrust vectoring. They're gimbaled. And so they can actually control the attitude, that is to say, the direction of the missile, whether it goes like this or this or this. And the gimbals failed. And so then the asymmetries in the thrust of the motors that were still functioning caused this to flip. So even though it looked like it was doing what it was supposed to, it actually wasn't. So that was another problem. And then the other problem is that while the flight termination system did work, it took about 40 seconds, and that's unacceptable. It's got to work right away when you want to terminate the flight. So they've got some problems that they've got to solve. So let's look at these motors. So here's a bottom view of the heavy lift booster, and you can see there's this whole array of motors in here. And these ones in the center are the ones that are supposed to be gimbaled and provide attitude control. And you can see that partway through the flight, 3 of them did not ignite on the pad, on liftoff. So that caused some asymmetries in the thrust. And then later on in the flight here, you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 of the motors have failed. So they've got to find out what the heck is going on. Now, NASA, and probably many in the public, think that this was a big failure, and it certainly wasn't a huge success. But Elon has a different attitude. He says success is far from certain, but excitement is guaranteed. And his view is that this is an experiment, that he learned a lot from it, and next time he'll do better. So